Son 701.
Que el banner se ve muy padre, ¿no? Muy buen diseño, Patricia.
Sí, porque sí está complicado.
El banner ya es...
Sí, quedó bien.
Sí, puse en Facebook, así que me puso a la izquierda, pero no sé. Yo seguí las instrucciones, no sé
Cuando está en 30,
ven midiendo el público, también creo que eso ayuda.
bueno, de todas modas parte es un hecho. Hay muchas y hay explicar que voy a decir que no, pero lo que sí les quiero decir todo, referencia ya muy 38
Es su pista joven.
Gracias, gracias.
Es lo que le digo. Creo que ya están un poco dañados y no está bien metido.
¿Ya estás compartiendo?
Sí, no lo mejor habla con
Ay, no.
Pero antes el programa sí.
No se puede regañar a nadie. Voy a estar aquí. Dile que no me la dile que se
Ya fue suficiente con lo tuyo.
So we're going to start, guys. Welcome to our September TalkAbout. It's nice to see a lot of new faces. It's nice to see old faces. So of course. So this time we have the pleasure of presenting Omar. He was born in Veracruz, Mexico. He studied civil engineering at the Universidad Veracruzana. After getting his degree, he worked for 3 years as site and project engineer, and finally he decided to come to UCL to study his postgraduate studies. Over here, he successfully achieved the degree of Master in Science in Earthquake Engineering with Disaster Management in the Faculty of Engineering Sciences. After that, he was invited to continue with his PhD. He's currently a third-year PhD student in engineering applications of earthquake early warning systems in the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction from the Civil, Environmental, and Geomatic Engineering Department. So let's welcome him.
Thanks for the introduction. As Diana said, my name is Omar. And today we're going to talk about the recent earthquakes that have struck our country, or Mexico. But this is going to be a talk from a very earthquake engineering perspective, right? So the beginning of the talk might be a bit technical. If there's something you don't understand, please let me know. Raise your hand or please let me know because it may be a bit confusing. But anyway, in order to understand the damages that we found in the different structures in Mexico during the earthquake, I need to provide a bit of physics of earthquakes, basics of physics of earthquakes, and basics of earthquake engineering. So that's what we're going to do at the beginning of the talk. So in order to understand, well, we need to understand where do earthquakes occur, why do they occur. So in order to understand that, first we need to study the structure of the Earth. The Earth is divided mainly in three different layers. The first one is the crust, that is the uppermost layer of the Earth, and it's at a depth of 5 to 60 kilometers, and it's mainly composed by solid rock materials. Then we have the mantle of the Earth, that is the middle portion, is the layer in the middle, with a depth from 60 kilometers to 2,900 kilometers, and this one is in a semi-molten state or a semi-liquid state. And then we have the core of the Earth, that is the innermost layer, that has a depth between 2,900 kilometers to 6,500 kilometers. In order to understand where earthquakes occur, we are just going to consider the outermost part of the mantle, so the top part of the mantle, and all the depth of the crust. And we are going to define this area as the lithosphere. Okay, it's got a depth of 100 kilometers, and this is the depth between 0 and 100, where we are going to find earthquakes in the interior of the Earth. So the lithosphere is divided into a small number of large and rigid pieces that are called tectonic plates. And given that these tectonic plates are floating in semi-molten liquid materials, they are floating, okay? And given that floating, they are moving all the time, and there is interaction between them, there is friction between them that creates the transfer of stresses, the transfer of energy between one plate and another. And once one of these plates cannot storage more this energy that is being contained in the plate, they suddenly break, and the energy that is released from the breaking of the rock, from the breaking of the tectonic plate, radiates away from the epicenter as seismic waves that travel all over the interior of the Earth. And once they reach the ground, or where we are standing at, the ground shakes back and forth, and we have an earthquake. Okay? Is that clear for everyone? So again, an earthquake is a release of energy in the tectonic plate that travels as seismic waves. Once they reach the surface of the Earth, we have an earthquake. Right? This map shows the tectonic plates that have been identified by seismologists around the world. I'm going to assume Mexico, because this talk is about Mexico. So there are five tectonic plates that are active for that world, or that the Mexican territory is over 5 tectonic plates: North American plate, Caribbean plate, Cocos plate, Pacific plate, and the Rivera plate. As you can see, the west of the country is where all the plates are in contact with each other, and that's why this is the most seismic area of the country. Okay, if we have a look at the different where earthquakes occur around the world, the black dots, and I bring back the map of the tectonic plates, you can see that exactly where we have the dots, it's exactly where we have the boundaries between the tectonic plates. Can you see that? Yes. If you follow any boundary of any plate, you're going to find a path of earthquakes. Okay? There are 90% of the earthquakes around the world occur in these boundaries. As you can see, there are some earthquakes, some dots that are not exactly in the boundaries. We call them, well, these ones that occur in the boundaries, they are interplate events, and the ones that don't occur in the boundaries, they are called intraplate events. They are more rare, but they occur as well as internally the tectonic plates might get deformations as well, and there's a release of energy, but we have only 10% of these earthquakes around the world.
Can I say something?
Yep.
So how do you, like, if you never work with tectonic plates, how do you distinguish this is one tectonic plate and this is another tectonic plate?
Yeah, defined already.
Yeah, that's already the result, right? How do you say this is
Interplate or intraplate?
Okay.
The location of the epicenter. You can track the epicenter of the earthquake, and you can see if it was in a boundary or if it was within the tectonic plate.
What I mean is, how do you distinguish the boundaries of one tectonic plate?
They are very well defined. Geologists have defined the location of the tectonic plates, and well, another thing is that there is a projection of the tectonic of the boundaries, and we call them faults. Okay, so when there is a fault, but the thing is that we don't have faults all around the boundaries of the tectonic plates. They are just located in specific places, like San Andreas Fault, that is very well known, that is right here. But we know that one, but there are many faults that we don't know around here because they haven't broken. Okay, so okay, 75% of the global earthquakes around the world occur in what we call the Pacific Ring of Fire. This is the most active area around the world, and the top 10 stronger earthquakes ever recorded in the history of Earth are located in this ring of fire. Of course, we have Chile, because Chile has the number one, the strongest earthquake ever recorded, magnitude 9.5. And, well, in this ring of fire, we're going to find the strongest earthquakes in the world. This is the top 10. And, as you can see, we are over here. So, it's not rare at all that we have very strong earthquakes in our country, because we are part of this area that is the most active area around the world. Okay, how do we measure earthquakes? There are two concepts that have to be defined here. One is the magnitude of the earthquake, and another one is intensities. The magnitude of the earthquakes is a single parameter, a single value that describes the amount of energy that is released during an earthquake. Okay, this is unique, and we're not going to have two magnitudes. There is going to be one and only one. And then we have the intensities. The intensities represent the earthquake potential of damage in a given location. Okay, so when it comes to intensities, we need to understand that from the epicenter of the earthquake, as the distance increases, our intensities are going to reduce. All right? We have two different types of scales in terms of intensity. One that defines, in terms of technical parameters like acceleration, what's the intensity that we expect as the distance increases, as the waves start to travel. And then we have other type of intensity scales that are called observational, that measure mainly what people feel during an earthquake. Okay? So the first one are in terms of acceleration, velocity, or displacement, and the second ones, like the modified Mercalli index, define what people feel during an earthquake. So, for example, the modified Mercalli index is divided in 12 levels, where the minimum level is I didn't feel the earthquake, I didn't feel anything, and the maximum is I just realized that the structure in front of me collapsed, something fell on me, I have an injury, and the medium levels define like, I don't know, I felt dizzy, or I saw that some things were falling in the building, or I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, I couldn't evacuate. So according to what the people feel, the observational intensity scale is going to define that. Again, an earthquake has only one magnitude, and the intensity is going to be totally dependent on the location of the earthquake and the location of the structure or the place that we are interested on. Any question on that? The difference between magnitude and intensities is clear? Okay. Something that has to be clarified here, and it's very important. The magnitude, the level of magnitudes that we are given by Sismológico Nacional or by the USGS, that is the United States Geological Service, are in terms of moment magnitude scale. Especially in Mexico, the media love and they really like to talk about the Richter scale. That is a scale that has not been used in many years. And this scale defines, so when we have an earthquake, there we have instruments that can detect the acceleration of the wave. And this scale defines the size of the earthquake to the maximum amplitude of this wave, okay? It has nothing to do with energy release, and this is something that might lead to confusions, because two earthquakes with the same wavelength, with the same maximum wavelength, can have a different energy release. So a very good example is 1906 San Francisco earthquake and 1960 Chilean earthquake that both had 8.3 magnitude in terms of these scales, while the energy release in the Chilean earthquake was much larger than the energy release in San Francisco, and the disaster that the earthquake caused in Chile is not even comparable to the damage that was created in San Francisco. So we had the same magnitude, but one was more damaging. So we had to use a magnitude that actually takes into consideration energy release, and that one is called moment magnitude. I don't really understand why Sismológico and when we see Twitter or when we see Facebook or whatever they post, they don't write this is the abbreviation for moment magnitude, but they never write it. They just say magnitude 8 or magnitude 7 or magnitude something. But the media in Mexico love to talk about Richter scale, and that's wrong. That the scale is not used anymore. So the moment magnitude scale is a logarithmic scale, and when we increase 1 unit of magnitude, for example, from 2 to 3, we have 32 times more release of energy, okay? So from 2 to 3, we have 32 times, then we have 32, 32, 32, 32, 32, so it's logarithmic. So this means that the difference between an earthquake magnitude 8 and an earthquake magnitude 9, the release of energy is huge. It's something very massive. And because some people believe that the difference between 7 and 8 is just an unit, but at this level, between 8 and 9 or 7 and 8, the amount of energy released is quite considerable. In the middle, it's important to see as well the number of earthquakes per year that experts expect to happen in the world. As you can see, very low magnitude earthquakes happen quite often around the world, while the strongest they get, the less likely to occur they are. That's why some experts used to say the earthquake is shaking all the time. We have earthquakes all the time, and we do have earthquakes all the time, magnitude 2, magnitude 3, but we just can't feel them. But they are there. We have earthquakes. We have seismic activity every day in the world.
Where is Mexico earthquake in that scale?
Well, which one? The last one, 7.1. We will be here.
Okay.
Stronger than the atom bomb?
Yes, stronger than Hiroshima atomic bomb. And that's the 19th of September. The 7th of September, we're here. 8. And Chile, you can see Chile here. 9.5. So the amount of energy that was released between 1960 earthquake in Chile and the last one we had in Mexico is 64 times more release of energy. That is, well, there's like here a comparison with equivalent kilograms of explosives. So it's, I don't know, I cannot imagine that. Any questions? From physics of earthquakes, that's it. Before going to the next part, I just want to emphasize that earthquakes cannot be predicted, right? There is no way, there is no one with scientific proof to show how an earthquake, where and when it's going to occur. Nobody can say that. Sismológico, USGS, CIRES, all the formal institutions in the country around the world say the same. We can't. Okay, there is no way. After the first earthquake in Mexico, there were people talking about solar flares, solar explosions, the planet X, and a lot of rubbish that just don't help after a massive earthquake like the first one. So I just can't imagine that I just experienced an earthquake in Mexico City that shaped every single building there, and then there is a guy who comes and tells me that because of a solar explosion we will have more earthquakes. I mean, the people who have no information about this, they just get panicked, they get into chaos. Of course, if the shaking was very destructive, I'm scared, I don't want to have another earthquake. And then one guy without any knowledge just comes and tells me, in 2 days we will have an earthquake that will, an earthquake magnitude 9 Richter, by the way, they don't even know what they're saying, and that is going to destroy whole Mexico. So please, try to share this with the people you know. They cannot be predicted, nobody can predict them, and hopefully one day somebody can, but so far nobody can. Okay? how can we know what's the damage that we're going to expect in a building given a specific earthquake? So accelerographs are tools that we use. Well, accelerographs record accelerographs, and the accelerographs record the ground motion given a time frame. Okay, these accelerographs don't have to be exactly in terms of acceleration. They can be in terms of displacement or in terms of velocity. And in terms of this one, the one we have here, it's measuring the acceleration that the ground is experiencing during the earthquake. Okay, this is a random earthquake that I took from the internet. And they have three components. We have three components. An accelerograph is able to measure earthquakes in three components, two in the horizontal direction and one in the vertical direction, creating a 3D space in order to explain the ground shaking during the earthquake. Again, we have another pair of concepts that we use in Mexico a lot. It was hard to find this in the internet, to be honest. Oscillatory and trepidatory earthquakes. I don't know what's that, to be honest. In Mexico, people used to say that oscillatory earthquakes tend to move in just a horizontal direction, and trepidatory earthquakes used to move in the vertical direction. I have never seen a video where the people are jumping during an earthquake. That will be a trepidatory earthquake, that is just moving like this. I have never seen that, to be honest. And these are wrong terms that people use in Mexico a lot as well. As I said, accelerographs are able to detect the three different components of an of shaking. So there are both, all the motions are involved during an earthquake. And well, another thing I heard is that 1985 earthquake had more damage in Mexico City because it was an oscillatory earthquake, while the last one was a trepidatory earthquake. Things that really don't make sense. But yes, another thing that you need to share with your friends, with your family, with everyone, oscillatory and trepidatory earthquakes are things that just don't exist. All right? Well, what data we take from accelerographs in order to do seismic design of structures? It's called peak ground acceleration, and it's the maximum acceleration that is measured in an accelerogram. And in this case, it's exactly right here, and it corresponds to 30.g. G stands for the gravity of the Earth, that is 9.81. So this will be the maximum acceleration that my accelerogram recorded during this earthquake. Okay? Any questions there?
Why is the maximum?
Doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's negative or anything. It's just, yes, it's absolute. It's an absolute. Yeah. Where was I? Okay. However, earthquake engineers, seismic engineers have defined or have found that PGA is a very poor proxy for the estimation of damage in a building, as we are just measuring the shaking at ground level. So the shaking that we are expecting at a building with 10 floors or a building with 20 floors is going to be very different from the shaking that we are expecting just at the bottom of at the ground level. So we need, well, this is what I said, we have our accelerogram, we have our PGA, but the response of a short building is going to be much, much different than the response of a building with higher or taller or with different properties. In order to understand what's the actual response of a building given a specific ground motion, we need to understand the concept of response spectrum and the concept of period of vibration of a building. So look at me, please. Let's imagine that I have a pendulum here in my hand and I have a mass stick to it, okay? If I hold the mass and I let it go, my mass is going to start to oscillate with a specific period of oscillation, okay? Every time I'm doing this, that means that this is one vibration and this is the period of my building, of my pendulum, okay? Is that clear? Every time it's here and it comes back, that's one vibration and that's the period of my system. If I increase the length of my pendulum and I do exactly the same, the period is going to be longer as well. It's going to take longer to go and to come back, all right? If I take the pendulum and I twist it upside down, I can represent a building of the same height with the mass of the building totally concentrated at the top of my system, okay? I just twist it, and then every single building naturally has a period of vibration, all of them. That's why during the earthquake, if you saw videos, there were buildings that were doing this. and they were scary, right? But that's natural. All of them do it. All of them. Every single building is gonna do that. How do we know what the actual period of elongation, the period of vibration of our building? Well, first we need to make sure that we understand that the period of the vibration of my building is going to be totally related to the mass of the building and to its resistant capabilities. That is called the stiffness, and the stiffness just defines how flexible or how stiff my building is. More flexible buildings will oscillate with a larger period than very stiff buildings that won't oscillate that much. So I can have two buildings with the same height, but if one is very stiff and another one is very flexible, the flexible will have a larger or a longer period of elongation, of vibration, than the stiff building. Is that clear? This is the formula we use to define the period. I'm not going to go into details in the formula, but if I reduce the stiffness, K is the stiffness, K stands for stiffness. If I reduce the stiffness and I increase the mass, I will have a larger period of vibration of my building. If I increase the stiffness and I reduce the mass, I will have a short period of vibration of my structure. Okay?
Would that be related to safety in any way? The less the stiffness, the more the safety? Or
well, it depends. Well, the stiffness is given by the design of the earthquake, of the building. Okay. So, yeah, well, one important thing is usually concrete buildings are stiffer than steel buildings. Steel buildings are more flexible naturally. But yeah, that's well, you design the building and then you get the period of vibration.
Is there a correlation for safety?
Not. I mean, the period doesn't mean how safe or not is the building.
If the building cracks, then.
Well, the building cracks, then you won't have a period because it's going to collapse.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. Is it related to the height of the building?
The height of the building, the mass is involved with the height of the building. As I said, I can have two buildings of the same height. Sorry. But if one is very stiff and the other is not, one will have a period of elongation larger than the other. They can have the same height. It's more related to the stiffness of my building. Yes?
Yeah, no, I would like to add that there's not exactly a rule direct. There is like she asked, it was related.
The period is related with the safety?
With the stiffness and the security of any building, and it depends as well of the earthquake vibration,
well,
the earthquake period of time.
Constant acceleration.
So maybe to one building that falls down with one earthquake.
It's not going to fall with another.
Maybe in other time.
Depends on the frequency of the earthquake and the frequency of the building. If they match, we have a phenomenon called resonance, and that's the word that can happen. Like the building is going to behave like crazy during that earthquake, but that's something we cannot predict. But we can design it to stand that.
Sorry, what does the T stand for?
T period. The period is the time it goes.
K is a constant.
Sorry?
What is K?
K is the stiffness. That period. So as I said, this is what we call a single degree of freedom system, and is one of the simplest way to represent the structure, with the mass that is just located at the top of the system, and a column with the stiffness of my system. If we use computational models to run the ground motion that the ground the accelerogram can be called time history of ground motion. Ground motion is the term that we use the most, so I'm not going to use any more accelerogram because I'm used to say ground motion. I don't want you to get confused. If we input the ground motion into a single degree of freedom system, we can understand what's the response of the top of the system in terms of acceleration, and then we can know actually what is the response of my system. Instead of just the PGA I was mentioning before will be just for the base, but if I carry out a model and I do my analysis for this system, I will understand what's the response of the top of my structure. As I said before, short single degree of freedom systems will be like for a house, 1, 2 stories. As I increase the length of the column, I will represent taller and taller and taller buildings. All right? So if I carry out an analysis, I have my ground motion, and I input this ground motion in different single degree of freedom systems, I can obtain the response. This is the response of the top floor of my system. If I take the maximum response in terms of acceleration of every single degree of freedom system that I model, then I can create what is called a response spectrum, where I compare the period of my structure with the maximum acceleration that I got from my analysis, okay? And then I can create this graph that is called a response spectrum, where whatever period of vibration of the building I have, I can come to the graph, I go to the y-axis, and I can tell what's going to be the acceleration that this earthquake input into my structure. Okay? Is that clear?
Regarding the effect on the integrity, structural integrity of the building, does faster acceleration or higher acceleration worse? Or
again, it depends on the type of structure. But this is just the beginning of my seismic analysis. This is just the force I'm going to use to input into my building, and then I'm going to run more complex analysis to understand that force, what that force is going to actually do in my building. Okay, I'm going to run a finite element modeling of my structure to understand every single column, every single beam, the slabs, everything, how they're going to respond to acceleration of this type. It's very important to take into consideration that for different types of soil, it doesn't matter. I can be here, I'm the same distance from the earthquake, and with a specific type of soil, then I can move over here, I have another type of soil. This is going to change a lot, and this is one of the effects that occur every single time in Mexico City, because the soil of Mexico City is one of the worst soils that we can have ever. As you know, Mexico City is located in a lake, so the fact that the location of the city is in a lake amplifies seismic waves when they arrive. In 1985, the earthquake was located 400 kilometers away from Mexico City. In many other countries, they will say 400 kilometers, nothing is going to happen. But in Mexico, when the waves arrived to Mexico City, they amplified, and you know what happened in 1985, right? 400 kilometers away. Mexico is one very particular example of soil amplification factors. So it's very important to take into consideration for the creation of this spectra, the plural for spectrum is spectra, to take into consideration the soil that we are going to design our structure on, to make sure that we are going to consider proper accelerations. Right? Is that clear? Okay. As I said, we have PGA that represents the acceleration that we have in the ground. If I have a single degree of freedom system of period equal to 0, it means it has no height, it has no mass. It's the acceleration that we are expecting at the bottom of in the ground. For seismic codes, this is the type of spectra that they have designed. They cannot use a particular event because there are many different earthquakes that happen in the history of Mexico. So they use a probabilistic methodology to study all the history of the earthquakes in the country, and then they come with these shapes that are the ones that we can find in the seismic code or the construction code of Mexico City, where the designer can go into the code, they know the period of the building they're going to design, they know the type of soil where the building is going to be, and they just can come, select, check the period, and select the acceleration they are going to design their buildings for, okay? But this is not a particular earthquake, this is a study that experts do in order to come out with the shapes, and then they can carry out, they can select the acceleration that is going to be expected from a random earthquake, and then they do the more complex seismic design or seismic analysis. Is that clear as well? Okay. So that's it from the earthquakes physics and the earthquakes and the engineering concepts I wanted to talk about. Now I'm going to talk about the actual earthquakes that just took place a couple of weeks ago in the country. The first one was the 7th of September. Some people say the 7th, some people say the 8th, because it was 11 p.m. in Mexico, so in Europe for us was already the 8th. It was an 8.2 magnitude earthquake that has received the name of Pijijiapan. The epicenter of the earthquake was 132 kilometers south from this place, Pijijiapan, Chiapas, is over here. And it had its epicenter 700 kilometers away from Mexico City and a depth of 58 kilometers. As you remember, the lithosphere, I told you, is from 0 to 100, so this totally makes sense. And the epicenter oh, sorry, I covered this. Well, the epicenter was located between the boundaries of the Coco Plate and the North American Plate. So far, 4,800 aftershocks have been defined, and, well, it is not weird that we had such a big earthquake in this area. This map shows from in the last 120 years the earthquakes with magnitude bigger than 8, larger than 8, that have occurred in the west coast of Mexico. This is the one that happened the 7th of September, and this one is the one that happened in 1985 in the coast of Michoacán. All right. What was the damage that this earthquake induced around the epicenter? So we have the two maps I told you about, one in terms of intensities, in terms of acceleration, and one map in terms of intensities, but observation of what people felt. So in the one in terms of acceleration, what we can see is that around the epicenter, we have very strong accelerations, and sadly, the locations or the cities that were around the epicenter had no seismic design at all, and they were constructions that were poorly designed, so that's why we had a lot of destruction just nearby the epicenter. On the other hand, because the epicenter was located 700 kilometers away from Mexico City, the damage in Mexico City was not very, well, there were no damages that were detected in Mexico City during this earthquake, and however they felt it. There was an early warning. I hope I can talk about early warning, although I'm about to finish. I have to finish very soon. I'm going to be able to talk about early warning. That's a very good aspect of this earthquake. We can talk about it later during wherever we go afterwards. But, well, this is the intensity that many buildings, well, the peak ground acceleration that many around the epicenter of the earthquake, and on the right-hand side, the observational one that was carried out by Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, that mainly they service in the internet to ask people around the epicenter what they felt. So what I told you, they just say, I felt that it was weak, that it was moderated, it was strong, it was very strong, it was severe, it was very violent, or it was extreme. In this case, around the epicenter, I don't know why, I don't know what people felt actually around, but there are many green dots, and it's very close, and as far as I know, this was a huge, I mean, look at Mexico City, there are many green dots, but this guy over here was like, okay, I was alright, and I don't know. That's why we cannot use this for as an engineering parameter. It's just a way of saying what people felt during that.
No, I was just going to say that it's an online survey, so probably the location and the type of the people.
I used to work in Patterson Hill in Chiapas, and just for context, that is the poorest region in Mexico. We saw a lot of damage.
Yeah, I'm sure. I have no doubt about it.
Yes.
The quality of the structures in this area of Mexico, well, just Mexico City has seismic design, to be honest. A problem in Mexico is that, okay, in Mexico City it is compulsory to follow the seismic code and the construction code for Mexico City. But every single state around Mexico, the 32 states, have a different legislation. Do you say legislation, or you're just inventing a word? Okay. Different normatives, and they can do whatever they want in different states. Okay, they don't have to follow the rules of Mexico City, and even if they follow the rules of Mexico City, because Chiapas and Oaxaca, obviously, they don't have a specific code for that specific area. So what they do is that they take the seismic provisions of Mexico City and they apply them here, which is totally wrong, because the ground and the soil in this area is completely different than the ground that we have in Mexico City. So the only thing they do is they take assumptions and they say, okay, the soil here is very similar to Condesa, the soil here is very similar to Xochimilco, so let's use that and let's carry out a seismic design, but they don't even do it. So probably they do it, but you just told me the amount of damage that you saw over there was huge. So that's due to a lack of seismic design of structures over there. And then we have the 19th of September 2017 earthquake that was defined as Puebla Morelos earthquake, 7.1 moment magnitude. It was located between the state of Puebla and Morelos, and it was 120 kilometers away from Mexico City with a depth again of 58 kilometers. This map, so as I said before, there are interplates and intraplates events. This one was located over here. This is the area where interplate earthquakes take place in Mexico, the west coast. This was more into the North American plate, but this is not an extraordinary event. It is not something that, well, nobody expected it, nobody knew that it was coming, but once it appeared, it's not something weird that we have an epicenter over here. As you can see, these red stars and the blue stars are past earthquakes that have occurred as well in the intraplate area of the North American plate. The last one, 1980, in Puebla, one of these that was very damaging as well. But okay, in this case, we were just 120 kilometers away from Mexico City. So in this case, the damage that we expect that we had in Mexico City was more and more considerable. Again, a map that shows peak ground acceleration for different areas around the epicenter. You can see here that all the states of Puebla, Morelos, Mexico City appear to the north, show that the intensities were quite high. In this case, what we have over here, it's a map that shows the intensity that was felt by earthquakes, but given the number of stories they have. So what they followed is what I told you. They use the single degree of freedom system to assess structures of 1 floor, structures of 2 to 3 floors, structures from 8 to 12 floors, and structures from 16 to 20 floors. Here are the periods of I think it's 0.1 second, 0.2 seconds, 1 second, and 2 seconds. So they did exactly what I told you. They took single degree of freedom system with these periods. They used accelerograms that they recorded in these areas, and they carried out analysis. And as you can see, very short structures from 1 floor to 10 floors were very, very affected by the earthquake. The red means it was very strong, while the greener it gets, or blue, it's lower. So tall buildings in Mexico City didn't experience much acceleration, while very short structures were very affected by these events. And the collapsed buildings that we saw in Mexico City, if you see the pictures, more of them are 10 floors or low, or less. If you look at tall buildings, I think there was no collapse of any tall building, and this explains very well why we had very low accelerations in those areas.
Sorry, does that red area on the picture on the right?
On the right.
Yeah, does that correlate to where the lake is?
This is called Mexico City. This is all the area of Mexico City. So I don't remember very well where the lakes are. I'm not from there, so if you can help me.
It's in the north, like in the center, left.
This?
Yes, that is the part. That's
I'm
the
not,
west zone.
to be honest, I'm not familiarized with the geography of Mexico, of Mexico City. So the people from there can help me here a bit, because I'm not sure. But look, like.
But if you see a map of where the buildings collapsed, you can see them through the lake system, actually. So, yeah, it was mainly in the zona lacustre of Mexico.
The lake area.
Yes, like in downtown Mexico City up to Chapultepec, where
I'm lost, so.
yeah.
Wait, she was first. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit far, so I can't see the numbers. So which units are they? I'm sorry, I can't read
Where?
the numbers on the scale from.
Here is centimeters over second square.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the range is from the low.
Well, it's 150, but the accelerations that were felt in Mexico were in the order of 500, so they were super, super high. 150, I think is 130 defines that it was super strong, and they felt 500, so it was super, super strong. Rafa?
So I have a question about the depth of the earthquake.
Yeah.
So how relevant it is that this one was 58 kilometers depth and the other one was 41? So
Both were 50.
Or 50 or whatever.
It's very important. The deeper, the less damaging it gets. But it's not like a general rule. It's usually the deeper, it's the better in terms of damages around the epicenter of the earthquake.
So one would rather a deeper earthquake but closer to your city than.
No, not necessarily. I mean, if it's very close, it doesn't matter if it's very. It can be very deep, but if it's close, there are going to be damages. That's not a rule. I mean, because it's up to 100 kilometers. If it's very close to the epicenter, there will be high intensities around the. It depends on the magnitude as well.
Sorry, I don't know if you explained already, but how do you determine the deepness of the earthquake? Or is it measured from the
It's where the break occurs, exactly where the rock breaks. That's the point of the epicenter that they take into consideration to know the depth.
So you have the plates and then the point in which they.
Yes, there is a point where the fault or the tectonic plate breaks, and then they know how to calculate that depth.
What is the average depth in which quakes occur?
No, there's no average. Well, this is my last slide. I have the early warnings, but I won't be able to talk about the early warnings. Something very important. Both earthquakes, the last one was 1909, 2017, and the next one is 1909, 1988. This is a coincidence, all right? Please don't think that in 32 years, the 19th of September, people will leave Mexico City, people will go away because they're going to believe that please, this is a huge coincidence that is very unfortunate, to be honest, because many people thinking that in 32 years, everyone has to evacuate Mexico City. This is a huge coincidence, right? This is something that has no relationship. If this is the epicenter of the earthquake in right now, the 19th. This is the epicenter of the earthquake in 1985. So there are different systems, different earthquakes, different everything. So there is no way to relate them. All right. And just to conclude, it's very important to take into consideration that the earthquake on the 19th, the intensity that were expected, or the intensity, that were induced in Mexico City, were considered in the seismic code of Mexico. All right. So this means, and yesterday the Sismológico UNAM released a paper where they say exactly this: the new built structures in Mexico City should not have been damaged by the 2017 earthquake in Mexico. What does it mean? That they could have amazing designs, they could have the most beautiful blueprints in the office, but they didn't build while they had to build. Okay? So this is a problem of organization, of planning, of supervision, of construction that cannot be understandable. To be honest, when I read that, I was expecting to read that accelerations were bigger and the code didn't take into consideration these accelerations. But on the other hand, I'm talking about new buildings, okay? Old buildings, anyway, after 1985, there should be a lot of retrofitting of structures to make sure that they were going to stand an earthquake, but that didn't happen. But for new buildings that were built considering the new rules, there shouldn't be, let's not talk about collapse. There shouldn't be damage, okay? Damage. And there are many structures that were damaged during the earthquake, and this is something that really I don't know how to explain this. Like I go to the construction site and I talk to the engineer, and the engineer tells me, you know, Omar, this column is very, very big. I think we should reduce it. And I said, yeah, reduce it 15 by 15. There's nothing is going to happen, right? I really, it's incredible how. I don't want to talk more than I should because there's no official data about the buildings that collapsed or that have been damaged. But okay, yesterday they released this and they said it. The new built structures in Mexico City shouldn't have been damaged by the 1917 earthquake. And let's not talk about the elementary school because then I'm going to get crazy. So let me go back just to explain very fast about the elementary school. Let's say that this is the spectrum that I'm going to use for the design of a school. The schools and hospitals are designed considering, no matter the period, considering the top forces in the spectrum plus 50% the acceleration that we are going to expect in here, okay? If the forces of the earthquake were below this, and I increased 50% this in order to do the design of my school or my hospital, the last thing that can happen is the collapse of the structure. So that's something super embarrassing for Mexican engineering, to be honest, that a school collapsed full of kids, and you know, that was the highlight of the day, right? That I don't know how many kids died in that event, but that's something that, that's very annoying, to be honest. Well, anyway, where are we? So, final conclusion, I cannot talk about this. We can do another talk about it if you want. I can talk about this whenever you want. We can organize another talk about or something different because this is very important for the country as well. Very, very important. But just to finish, Mexico has shown that we are super amazing, the leaders worldwide for response after an earthquake. But we have shown that we are not prepared at all, and we don't have planning, and we don't have any kind of prevention. Well, we have prevention, but I'm not going to talk about. The expert for that is Marantz. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Mexican community wasn't ready for this earthquake, for the couple of earthquakes, for many reasons. That's what I believe. There is a lot of lack of education for earthquake engineering in Mexico. People don't know many things. People don't know. Very quick question. How many of you are from Mexico City? Okay. How many of you knew? No, don't keep your hand up, please. How many of you knew about the early warning system of Mexico? All of you? How do you know? Because you heard it, right? How many spots we have in TV around Mexico about early warning of Mexico? Do we have? In Mexico, probably. Because who is not from Mexico City? Have you seen a spot of early warning outside Mexico? No. We have no idea, right? And
they
then,
don't have early warnings, do they?
Just in the West. I think. Wait.
Only Mexico City has the warnings.
No, there are 5 cities. Oaxaca. I have this map. Okay, this is the early warning system of Mexico. Okay, these are the stations that cover the most seismic area of the country. But if I come to this map, sorry, this one, you can see that there are many earthquakes that are on the east. Actually, I'm from Jalapa. In 1920, we had an earthquake that has been the second most dangerous earthquake in the history of Mexico. 600 dead. And to be honest, before I started my master's, I had no idea about the early warning system of Mexico because I mean, how many of you, well, I'm not going to keep asking about this. But we have very strong tools in Mexico to be a resilient country in terms of earthquakes, but sadly, we don't have information, we don't have education, and if we don't have education, we can have the best tools, but sadly, the disasters are there, right? And this, for me as an earthquake engineer, is super embarrassing. It's very sad that we have all the tools to have proper buildings, proper structures, and people just don't give. They don't care, and they do whatever they want. And I'm sorry, I cannot talk about this because I talked already 50 minutes, but okay, thank you.
Yeah, so my question is regarding to this later point. It was after 2009 in Italy, after one of the biggest earthquakes, that 6 seismologists went to jail because they failed to advise the government about the dangers of the activity of seismic activities there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, what was the legal foundation of this kind of charges? Because actually they were charged as manslaughter. So can we have the same in Mexico, or what happened? Are you aware of that case?
To be honest, I'm an engineer, so
you're an engineer.
I don't like politics and that stuff. So
no.
I design buildings. And
you're aware of that case?
No.
So I don't know. To be honest, I don't have no idea about what you're talking.
But something is happening in this moment because actually the New York Times just mentioned that you said that the structure of the buildings in Mexico City shouldn't
be affected.
Shouldn't be affected. So there is a group of Mexican lawyers from the UNAM that actually are taking information of the buildings with damage,
right?
Who, the constructors, the companies, everything, and they are starting something to demand this kind of actions. Yeah. But it's like the public sector. The question that I have for you, for example, is what is next in terms of public policy, not for Mexico City, but nationally?
Sorry, that was
I mean, what is your opinion on that? What is the next step in terms of public policy?
Well, that's not my expertise. I'm sorry, I'm an engineer.
There's something called the window of opportunity.
What would you suggest?
Yeah.
There's something called the window of opportunity, and every time after a big disaster strikes some countries, there are some measures that are taken. But that's not a rule, because, for example, a couple of years ago with the big earthquake in Chile, there was this window of opportunity, and the politics did nothing. So it's still there strong. In Mexico City, we did learn the lesson in 1995. We started the construction of building codes. We started developing of Atlas de Riesgo, risk atlas. We developed the early warning system. We have the first cat bond that ensures public infrastructure in Mexico that it was ever released in the world. It's called Fonden, and we use the funds for reconstruction from disasters caused by natural hazards. But there's a lot to be done, especially in the most poorest states in the country, like Chiapas, like Oaxaca, where we saw the effects in the first earthquake. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, but also about the collapse of the buildings. It would be good to have the data. How many of the buildings that collapsed were actually new?
Once they release that information, I will happily share it to all of you with an explanation or something. They haven't provided any formal or some document about the buildings that collapsed. Last note that is very important. We cannot design buildings not to be affected at all. Okay. What we do is that we design the code takes into consideration damage that can be retrofitted one day after, and in 2 days the building can be occupied. Okay, we're going to accept some damage that cannot be designing an earthquake to not have any single failure. It's super expensive, and I think there's probably no building around the world that has that. Okay, we can allow some damage, but it's something that workers go tomorrow. They fix it, and in 2 days, kids are again in school. Okay, we allow that. What we don't allow is the damage that don't let me go to the building in 2 days, in 1 month, or in 6 months, and let's not talk about the collapse. Okay? Thank you.
Someone else more questions for Omar?
I think it was said that it was the epicenter was not between two tectonic
plates. It was an intraplate.
And it was intraplate.
Yeah.
And how does that happen?
It's the formation in the interior of the tectonic plate. So it's not just in the boundaries. In the middle, there are some physics going on, but there is some release of energy as well in the intraplate event. I mean, there is some stresses that are being transferred from. I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that, but I will look at it and I will send you everyone. I'm going to tell you exactly how intraplate events occur, because I'm an earthquake engineer. That's a bit more of a seismologist, but I will look for it and I will let you know. But it's not very extraordinary or weird or anything. I told you, as you saw in the figure, there are many earthquakes in that area. So
yeah, okay. And I have another question. Well, maybe you already said, because I was a bit distracted. But it seems that on this occasion, many of the collapsed buildings were in between the boundaries of what it was the lake and what it was the inland.
Mm-hmm.
So does that correlation is meaningful?
No. The spectrum I was showing, they take into consideration soil effects. So considering the soil that you have is the design that you do. So for the lake, you have a design that takes into consideration higher accelerations, and in the inland part, you have a spectrum that considers a bit less. So you are designing exactly, these spectra are taking into consideration soil effects, amplification of waves, amplification of accelerations. So the fact that they were in the lake area is not an excuse to say that's why they collapsed, because that's considered by the code. Did I answer your question? Then I didn't understand, sorry. But, no? I don't know.
We can talk in the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone else more questions?
So, just a reminder for everyone that's new to UCL, welcome. For those that have been here before,